The Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK is hosting this urgent human rights webinar to address the resumption of genocide in Gaza after Israel's unilateral violation of the ceasefire, which has been met with silence and complicity from global powers. This discussion will also highlight the stark double standard in international responses to conflicts, particularly the contradictory stance of the US President Donald Trump, who has presented himself as a man of peace in the Russia-Ukraine war, while openly endorsing further bloodshed in Palestine. The topics covered in this webinar will be
يا انس اطلع برا بس لا برا بس يلا
the resumption of massacres in Gaza after Israel's violation of the ceasefire, international complicity enabling Israel's impunity, double standards in addressing wars and international justice, the responsibility of the global community in stopping the genocide and ensuring accountability. I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers, Richard Boyd Barrett, Member of the Irish Parliament, Shaukat Adam, Member of Parliament of the United Kingdom, Astrid Wagner, Cybersecurity Specialist, Arthur Nilsson, British writer and author, Chris Sidoti, Member of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Palestine, and Professor Stephen Zunes, Professor of International Security and Foreign Policy, University of San Francisco, and finally, Dr. Lex Stackenberg, Senior Advisor to the Arab Resistance for Democracy and Development. Hello and welcome. Thank you for making the time to be here at this tragic time. Each of you will have about 5 to 7 minutes. And we will start with Richard Boyd Barrett, Member of Irish Parliament. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thanks to the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK for organizing this seminar. And I would like to sincerely apologize in advance for the fact that I will have to leave after my contribution because we have a major conference that started now here in Dublin, which will centre a lot on the same discussion among activists here in Ireland and in preparation for big demonstrations and mobilizations over the horror that is recommencing in Gaza, the genocide that is recommencing at the hands of the Israeli regime. So I do want to apologize, and I'm really genuinely sorry I won't be here to hear the other contributions, but hopefully I can listen back to them afterwards. I think virtually every Palestinian and anybody who has any familiarity or looked honestly at the plight of the Palestinians know that since 1948, and indeed before, the Zionist project was predicated on a genocidal logic, which was the elimination of the Palestinian people from the land of Palestine. That's not, I think, a controversial assertion, even when you look at the writings of the founding fathers of Zionism. They were very clear in their own minds that to establish the Zionist project, to establish the Israeli state, that they had to eliminate the Palestinians, and that there was a genocidal logic of ethnic cleansing, which the Palestinians are very, very familiar with, and anybody who's honest about the history of Zionism in Palestine, I think, would have to say is undoubtedly the case, that there was a genocidal character to the entire project. But for most of the rest of the world, it has been veiled in various justifications, that it was a land without people for a people with no land, that, you know, it was a civilizing mission of establishing democracy in the Middle East, or even in the aftermath of the October events and the genocide that we've witnessed, a horrific genocide we've witnessed for the last 17 or 18 months, that somehow Israel was defending itself against terrorism. Now, I think that the last 17 or 18 months have revealed to hundreds of millions, if not billions of people across the world who maybe didn't know much about Palestine, didn't know much about the history of this conflict, that all of those justifications are threadbare, and that what we've witnessed is a genocide, that there's no justification for it, that it is Israel's actions in Gaza have been driven by an absolutely barbaric, horrific, genocidal logic. Nothing else could explain the massacres that have taken place, the genocidal massacres, the destruction of Gaza, the fact that if all of this was supposedly a reaction to October the 7th, why then is there ongoing accelerating ethnic cleansing happening in the West Bank also? So the true nature of the Zionist project and of the genocidal character of that project has been revealed. But even still, there was a pretense of not admitting the truth about it. And there was an enormous reaction across the world. And of course, the heroic resistance of the Palestinian people against this barbaric genocidal campaign that we've witnessed did create pressure enough, I think, in the Western world to force the ceasefire on Israel, which it didn't really want to agree to. But now Trump, being elected, has dropped all the pretense. And Trump, no longer is maintaining any pretense that there's any sort of moral compass driving either Western support for Israel or the Israeli regime. It's just very simply, we are willing to commit any level of atrocity. There's no red line. We are willing to massacre the Palestinians, and we are doing so with a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza and to eliminate the Palestinians in the interests of Zionism and the strategic self-interest of the United States empire. And that's what I think Trump has changed the rules in that all the pretenses now are gone. And I find sort of grimly ironic about all of this is that the European Union and the European powers, who've also provided the means, the weapons, and the political justification over decades for Israel to commit the crimes that it has committed against the Palestinians, and indeed continue to arm it and provide excuses for it over the last 17 or 18 months of genocide, are expressing some shock at the Trump administration, mostly out of self-interest because of the threatened trade war that Trump is threatening against the European Union. But their double standards are even more starkly revealed. Even though they are sort of vaguely horrified at the Trump administration, they're now using this as a justification for militarizing Europe. So there's a big push on now to demand that much more money is now spent on weapons and arms. And Trump has revealed, in a way that wouldn't have been admitted before, that America's interest in Ukraine had nothing to do with Ukrainian self-determination or horror at Putin's invasion, which in my opinion was a brutal, illegal, and unjustified invasion. But Trump has revealed that's not America's concern. America's concern is mineral resources in Ukraine, and their own self-interest is driving their foreign policy. And they don't really care who gets killed. They don't care about self-determination, and they most certainly don't care about the Palestinian people or the horrors that Israel is willing to visit on them. And that has now emboldened the Zionist regime and Netanyahu to say, right, we can restart the genocide. There's no holes barred. There's no red lines. We can do what we want. So it is a very, very grim and terrible situation that we are facing, where we really see empire and colonialism unmasked, and its real motives of just brutal might is right, brutal self-interest, the classical logic of imperialism revealing itself in its most brutal and stark form. And the Palestinian people facing a terrible price on top of the horror that they've witnessed over the last period. The only thing I can say by way of trying to strike a final note of optimism in the face of this is that this is now apparent. The terrible logic and the incredible double standards of the Western powers have been revealed in front of the eyes of hundreds of millions, if not billions of people across the world who have taken to the streets in unprecedented numbers, demanding an end to this horror, demanding an end to Western complicity with the crimes that Israel is committing against the Palestinian people. And I expect that there will be massives on the streets here again in Dublin, and we've seen enormous demonstrations. I think we will see massive mobilization across the world in response to this restarting of the genocide against the people of Gaza. And certainly one of the things that we will be saying, as well as all the points that we've been making consistently, is that the Western governments are the enablers of this genocidal horror, that it is only the political support, the economic support, and the military support that is provided to Israel by Western powers that enables this horror to be committed. But we will also be pointing out to people, it's not just out of altruism that we should stand with the Palestinian people against this genocidal horror, but that the horrific logic that has been unleashed on the Palestinian people is now coming back to haunt the Western world itself. In that Western leaders are saying we must spend more on arms, more on weapons, money that should be going into housing and health and education and the many deep problems that exist in a very unequal and unfair Western world, dominated precisely by the sort of billionaires who are surrounding Trump at the moment, that in standing with the Palestinians, we are actually, ordinary people in the West are standing in their own interests, that they have a common interest with the Palestinian people in fighting this warmongering, genocidal, colonial horror show that is being unleashed by Israel and is being enabled by Trump and by Western governments. It seems to me that is the argument that we have to make here in the West, that ordinary people have no interest at all. In fact, they stand to suffer if the horror against the Palestinians continues, and that they have an interest in standing with the Palestinian people, because opposing the genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza and more generally in Palestine is a fight literally for all of humanity. I think that is now being revealed in the starkest terms by the Trump administration, and that this is an existential moment where the world has a choice. Do we stand with humanity against this horrific genocidal logic, or do we allow this horror to continue, not just at the cost of genocide against the Palestinians, but where inevitably more horror, more warmongering, more brutality is going to be unleashed on the world unless we stand together with the Palestinians against this horrific logic that Trump is supporting and emboldening against the Palestinian people by the Israeli regime.
Thank you so much for your powerful words. Thank you. I have one question for you. So given the scale of atrocities and Israel's repeated violations of international law, isn't it time for governments to move beyond just condemnation and start taking serious action? Things like cutting diplomatic ties, pushing for Israel's suspension from the UN, sanctioning companies that continue to support it with weapons. What do you have to say?
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I should have made all those points, but in a way, I suppose to many of the people on this webinar, they're obvious, but absolutely. In fact, Francesca Albanese, I met with her yesterday. She was here in Dublin. Interestingly, though, our government didn't meet her. They were too busy. The centre-right parties who've just been re-elected in Ireland were too busy to meet the UN Special Rapporteur, who was making exactly that point, as we will be making on the demonstrations here, saying that Trump is setting fire and Israel are setting fire to the international rules-based order and to international law. And these things will no longer have any meaning if we don't act against the genocide that Israel is committing and against the agenda that Trump is now setting out and, if you like, employing in justifying the crimes that Israel is committing. So we, on the streets tomorrow, will be again urging our government to enact the Occupied Territories, a bill that has been passed by the Irish Parliament, but which the government refused to implement, which would sanction Israel for its illegal occupation of Palestine. There's also a number of other bills that have received widespread, indeed majority support in Ireland, calling for sanctions, calling for the end of the facilitation of the sale of Israeli war bonds in Ireland, calling for the end of the facilitation of US military flights carrying weapons to Israel through Irish airspace, and many other demands for sanctions and an end to complicity or facilitation of the Israeli war machine or the US support for that war machine. So that is absolutely what we need to be demanding. But sadly, I have to say, our government, the sort of dominant parties who don't represent a majority, I mean, it's a sort of minority government. I won't go into the details of it. Majority sentiment is for sanctions being imposed, but the Irish government, out of deference essentially to Trump and fear of economic sanctions, are kowtowing to Trump. Instead of standing up to him, they are kowtowing to him. And they're being widely criticized in Ireland for that. But that's, if you like, where the battle is at here in Ireland, is saying, first of all, human beings and human rights are more important than perceived economic self-interest. But in actual fact, it is in our interests to stand with Palestine, to impose sanctions, because Europe is now using all of this as an excuse to spend more on weapons and to spend less on things like health and housing and education. So it will be to the detriment of Irish people if we don't sanction Israel for its egregious breaches of international law and human rights.
Thank you for that. And thank you also for coming and making time for us
Apologies again
today.
for.
Yeah, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, next we will go on. Next we will go to Dr. Lex Stackenberg, Senior Advisor to the Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development. Thank you, Lex. Oh, and I want to remind everyone, we have between 5 to 7 minutes. There will be time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Sound good?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. So I bring you greetings from Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development in Amman. I'm joining you myself from the southwest of France, from the city of Toulouse. We're an organization that works for social justice issues across Jordan and the Arab world. And I'm leading specifically a program on the question of Palestine for the organization. We have obviously, like everybody else, including your speakers and audience, witness the resumption of the genocidal war in Gaza over the last couple of days, which we unequivocally condemn. More than 600 to 800 Palestinians have been killed. I haven't seen the very latest figures, most of whom once again are children. Now, this latest escalation represents Israel's umpteenth refusal to abide by the ceasefire terms, and it underscores its commitment to the systematic destruction of Palestine and its people. Since the ceasefire came into effect on January 19th, Israel has persistently violated its terms. In less than 2 months, it has killed more than 100 Palestinians in Gaza, restricted the entry of humanitarian aid and reconstruction materials. For the last 20 days, it has completely sealed off the flow of food, fuel, medical supplies, and other essential aid, with the effect on rising food prices, community kitchens to shut down, and disease and starvation to spread. And now we have seen a full resumption of first air bombardment and now also ground operations, and this all on top of Palestinian people that have already endured more than 60 months of genocide. Meanwhile, and we should not forget that the colonization authority has launched Operation Iron Wall against the West Bank with a particular focus on the northern area. And refugee camps in Jenin, Tukar, and Nablus have borne the brunt of this annihilatory campaign, facing large-scale aerial bombardments, tanks invasion, the destruction of vital infrastructure, and ongoing evacuation orders. And hundreds of Palestinians have been abducted by Israeli forces, exceeding the number of those released in the agreed-upon prisoner exchanges. We should not forget that. So through these tactics, Israel has extended its 17 months long genocide, and the war on the Palestinian people never ended. It's only changed forms. And this war has been, on Palestine's existence, has been ongoing for over 100 years. At the core of it is, as also your previous speaker mentioned, settler colonial campaign of erasure is Palestinian refugeehood and the inalienable right of over 10 million Palestinians to return to their 611 villages and towns that they left in historic Palestine. And obviously, this right existentially challenges Israel's colonial reality built on destruction and displacement, and that's why it is causing such extreme violent pushback. So practically, I call on the international community to rescind its expansionist ambitions and to take concrete steps to remedy its long-lasting injustice against Palestine. And specifically, we demand an immediate two-way arms embargo on Israel, and two ways. It's not just the delivery of arms to Israel, but we should also not overlook that Israel itself sells arms and surveillance equipment and software and programs to over 100 countries, and that revenue is a key, and the leverage it brings with it is a political leverage. It brings with it is a key continued economic and financial enabler of the ongoing genocide. And so the continued arms sales and diplomatic cover provided by Western allies emboldens Israel's criminality against the Palestinian indigenous sovereignty. And then in parallel with this, and your question to your previous speaker also alluded to that, a shift from empty words of condemnation to concretely and complicit, to concretely and complicity, a shift from empty words of condemnation to concretely end complicity with Israel's genocide. And governments around the world must recognize that colonization is not diplomacy and genocide is not security. And finally, to underscore those previous 2 points, and we see all the signs of that happening, the mobilization of global solidarity and popular pressure to isolate Israel economically, politically, and diplomatically. Grassroots solidarity movements are essential to ensure the Palestinian liberation struggle return and justice is supported by meaningful action. I'll leave it at that and happy to come back further in response to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lex. I appreciate your words. Now let's go on to Professor Steven Zunes. Hello, are you here? Oh, there you are.
Oh, yes.
Nice to see you.
Thank you for including me in this important discussion. I apologize for coming in late. I just got back from teaching a class. And also, so I'm sorry to miss the previous speakers. Also apologize if I repeat anything. But we're seeing obviously a very clear violation of the ceasefire agreement. It's been almost universally condemned, both in regard to the high civilian death toll, and the fact that Israel, tore up an agreement. Of course, the United States is an exception, and unfortunately, Trump has defended Israel leaving the agreement and resuming the bombing. And this is a pattern we've seen before. Israel will agree to something, the United States will Israel then break it. United States will propose an alternative that is in Israel's favor, and the Arab side will say no, we want to have the original agreement, and the U.S. will blame the Arab side for not agreeing to change what they already agreed to. Again, this isn't new. I mean, I'm hard pressed actually to think of a single time that Israel has violated a ceasefire agreement, not just with Hamas, but with any Arab party, where the United States does not blame the Arabs. And we've seen this under both Republicans and Democrats. And again, this is not unique with Israel and Palestine. I mean, look at the wars in Central America, and the efforts at ceasefire, peace negotiations there, and then look at Vietnam. The Paris Peace Agreement. The Q regime was violating it all over the place, and finally, the North Vietnam and the National Liberation Front had enough, and they engaged in an offensive. But to this day, the narrative in the United States was it was the communists, that broke the agreement. I mean, the United States has always absolved its allies and blamed the other side, regardless of the facts on the ground. Now, as I've been saying in interviews with various media over the recent months, I was optimistic that the first phase of the ceasefire agreement would come through. But I doubted that phase 2 or 3 would ever happen because in phase 2, Israel was required to withdraw from its troops from Gaza. And we have seen how Israel has repeatedly violated its disengagement agreements. Most recently, of course, Lebanon. Most recently, the one that was negotiated just a couple months ago, but we can see this in 1978, 1982 to 84, and elsewhere. And look at the West Bank, the White River, talks, and in 1998, and again, the Israel violating that in the fall of 2000, and still not withdrawn from the territories they agreed to withdraw to. And the thing is, the United States has been the supposed guarantor of these agreements, and yet we refuse to uphold. Not only refuse to force Israel to live up to its obligations, but the fact that we are the guarantor, we failed to live up to our obligation. And it's based on the assumption that allied governments can occupy, colonize, and even annex territories seized by military force. And the United States is the only country in the world that recognizes Israel's illegal annexation of the Golan Heights. And again, this wasn't just Trump, but Biden upheld that. Yeah, it's not just Israel either. I mean, the U.S. has recognized Morocco's illegal annexation of the entire nation of Western Sahara, which is a full member state of the African Union. But again, this has really put us in a very bad spot in terms of challenging Russian aggression in Ukraine. Biden was saying, no country can expand its territory by force. No country can unilaterally change international boundaries. But in addition to Western Sahara and Western and the Golan, I mean, if you look at every so-called peace proposal towards around with the Palestine Authority in the West Bank, it's assumed that Israel could annex these huge swaths of these illegal settlements, even if it divides up the West Bank into a series of non-contiguous cantons. And then when the Palestinians, say, this isn't reasonable, we blame them as the reason there is no peace. And I want to underscore this has not always been the case. In 1957, following Israel's first invasion of the Gaza Strip, President Eisenhower asked, quote, Should a nation which attacks and occupies foreign territory in the face of United Nations disapproval be allowed to impose conditions on its own withdrawal? His answer was no, and Israel was forced to withdraw within weeks. By contrast, Trump's answer, Biden's answer, like that of Obama, Bush, Clinton, and Reagan before him, the answer is yes. And this is why Israel remains in occupation of much of the land it conquered in 1967, has reconquered the Gaza Strip, continues to colonize East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights with illegal settlements. And what's been very frustrating, particularly of late, is that the Democratic Party, which has quite correctly challenged Trump with his appeasement of Putin and his belief that Russia should be able to hold on to Ukrainian territory that illegally invaded and annexed. They're essentially siding with Trump on this. And this is not because of popular pressure. Polls show that 86% of registered Democrats in the United States believe U.S. military aid to Israel should be conditional on ending the war crimes and withdrawing from the occupied territories. Majority of Americans overall, but 86% of Democrats. And yet, virtually the entire Democratic leadership, I'd say probably 4 out of 5 Democrats in Congress, continue to support unconditional U.S. military aid, despite breaking the ceasefire, despite the ongoing atrocities, genocide, despite the refusal to be willing to make peace, despite the very real possibility of wholesale ethnic cleansing of over 2 million Palestinians. Now, again, I want to emphasize that this, if you look at the history of U.S. foreign policy, this is not unique. Now, on the one hand, I don't want to downplay the role of the Zionist lobby. I mean, I've had talks canceled, I've been trolled on social media, I mean, I fully acknowledge that the Zionist lobby has made it more difficult to challenge U.S. policy, to change U.S. policy, despite popular opinion. But this is not the first time, as I noted, the U.S. has supported foreign military occupation. I mentioned Western Sahara. Before that, you had Indonesia and East Timor. You had South Africa and Namibia, where we used our veto power to, block international actions on those occupations as well. But it's not even the first genocide. I mean, look at East Timor. 200,000 people, a third of that island state's population, was slaughtered by the Indonesians. I mean, look at the indigenous peoples in the highlands of Guatemala in the early 1980s. U.S. supported the genocide there. Look at Bangladesh, 1971, when the United States sided with Pakistan. So, again, let's not see what the U.S. policy in supporting a renewal of the genocide in Gaza in isolation with U.S. imperialism elsewhere. And the lack of concern, not just about human rights, but some of the most fundamental principles of international law, including the inadmissibility of expanding territory by force and genocide against an entire people. But one thing I want to end on least a note of a little bit of hope, and that is the fact that what we've seen the past 18 months, indeed, particularly what we've been seeing in the past week, really has led to a fundamental shift in American perceptions of the conflict. There's been a dramatic shift in public opinion, not just on military aid to Israel, but on whose side we should be on in the first place. And this is particularly strong generationally. I've seen my students, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. When I first started teaching Middle East politics back in the 1980s, I had to bend over backwards to tell the Palestinian narrative, because I assume most of my students, and assume correctly, they were familiar with the Israeli narrative and were sympathetic to it. Now, if anything, I have to do a little bit in the other direction because they're so hardcore pro-Palestinian now. It's just remarkable. I haven't seen any issue, including gay and lesbian rights, trans rights, that kind of thing, where there's such a straight line between public opinion and age. The other thing that, though, is, I think, and for among a lot of people, liberals and even many who identified as leftist, that while they were appalled at many of Israelis' policies, they opposed the settlements and occupation, they still subscribe to what used to be called the left Zionist narrative. That Israeli policies may be wrong, but still, that Israel has a right to exist, the national homeland for Jews, national liberation struggle for an oppressed people. And yeah, like other nationalist movements, they've done some nasty things in the process, but give them some slack and, that kind of thing. But, but we've seen that is largely disappearing. That the lines have been drawn a lot more clearly. And again, I think that has a lot to do with the generational shift, because this is the generation that's come of age with Black Lives Matter, with greater consciousness about indigenous rights. And if you look at Israel-Palestine from perspective of racism and colonial settlerism, it's pretty, it gets a lot clearer, about what it's about. And, so I do see, there will be change, there will be more challenges within U.S. policy, but frankly, it's going to be a while, unfortunately, until this younger generation is in charge. And frankly, as some of you may recognize, here in the United States, we're fighting just to save our own democracy. We're fighting just to resist authoritarianism. At home, we're fighting to resist the most overtly racist administration in office for nearly a century. So my big fear is that our hands are very full right now. And for some people, even people who are very sympathetic, there might not be the time and space and energy to fight for the Palestinians on the degree that we saw, last spring and earlier during the Biden's time in office.
Thank you very much for speaking and sharing that perspective on from the U.S. side. Next, we're going to have Shokad Adam, Member of Parliament of the United Kingdom. Welcome. You have about 5 to 7 minutes.
Lovely. Thank you so much, everybody. Sorry, I've joined this quite late and rudely. I will be leaving straight after. There's some incredible speakers on this webinar, and to follow from the professor is a real honour. And I know Lex, I hope he's well. I've got a few minutes. I'm going to take this from the perspective of my experience as a recently elected parliamentarian in July of last year. Some of you may know, was elected very strongly on my campaign for pro-peace, for pro-humanity, and some people call it pro-Gaza. But I'm going to take this as an individual who generally is an optimist, but sprinkled with pragmatism or realism. But 8 months into the role, I'm now unfortunately a realist, but I still have a sprinkling of optimism in me. So I'm going to take it from that perspective. So first, let's take this into 3 parts. One is the moral, second is the political, and thirdly is the judicial. And from my experience, morally, I genuinely feel that the political class and the political ruling class, I should say, have lost the moral compass completely. It's broken. It's incredulous that we are witnessing in real time killing of the most innocent, which is children. And yet in Parliament, it seems to not even move. So I hope I secured a debate on Tuesday on Britain's complicity or Britain's collaboration with Israel military. And this was the night, the day preceding the massacre of the 400 people in the tents, a majority of whom were children. And the most severe sentiment that was expressed from a conventional politician who has been pro-Israeli was, this is a little bit concerning. So to see the killing of so many children and innocent men, women and children, unprovoked breaking of the ceasefire, and we'll come to that later because I don't think it's a breaking of the ceasefire because I don't think the ceasefire ever existed. I think we have lost the moral compass, and that's the realism and the pragmatism unfortunately we face. But the positivity is exactly as Professor Stephen Zoon alluded to, is still in our hundreds, in our thousands, and in our hundreds of thousands. People are taking to the streets every week for the past 18 months. Students across the globe have shown what is possible with their encampment. And today, I'll be hosting an iftari with Palestinian students that we've managed to bring over to our city of Leicester via the Leicester University. And that was a result, I think, somewhat to the encampment that the students of my city did. So yes, the moral dial of the political class, it's just beyond words, and I think everybody will probably share in that sentiment. But there is still hope. The people of this country, despite the negativity and the biased media, are still know what the truth is and supporting the cause. Secondly, quickly politically, it goes on from the first point that I made, is that the political reaction to this tragedy has been a unique case study, I think, in our history, and there's more learned people here which will point to, that we were very slow in the uptake in the Rwandan genocide and other genocides. But this is a particular support, a unilateral support, I think politically has been extremely concerning. But my election, the election of 3 of my colleagues, has shown that people who are extremely angry about this have, at the end of the day, chosen democracy to voice their concern. With my election, I overturned a 22,500 majority as an independent for somebody who doesn't come from a political background. And my colleagues similarly, and other MPs who lost their seats because of the situation in Gaza, is a little light in this very, very dark period, that people are now utilizing everything in their resource to make their sentiments felt. And politically, people have taken the route of democracy to show those in power that, look, we will oust you. This is, I'm obviously speaking uniquely to England and Great Britain, and there are strong voices within the political spectrum. And very recently, there has been a turn on the tide, especially after a recent visit by parliamentarians to Israel and the way they were treated. Traditional conservative voters are now talking about West Bank settlers, extremist West Bank settlers, and how that has completely changed their perception of this conflict as a whole. So that, again, with the pragmatism and the realism, is a little bit of hope. And finally, with a little bit of time, and unfortunately in this one, is rather depressing, and that's a judicial. Despite all the evidence, despite eyewitnesses, despite every humanitarian organization, despite the ICC and the ICJ, we have in the UK, Mr. Lammy, who is our Foreign Secretary, whom I personally yesterday laid down everything that we know, still wouldn't accept that the genocide was being committed or war crimes were being committed. And despite the consequences of this, because we as a nation were the architects of the global order that we live in today. And I think this is a moment where, again, with what Professor said before me, we may be also the architects of its destruction. And that, for me, is a very, very bleak prospect. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking. Next, we will be going to Arthur Nelson, who is a British writer and author. I have 2 questions specifically to your expertise. Why do you think media outlets are still framing the events through a biased lens, despite the overwhelming evidence of systemic targeting of civilians? And also, in your view, how has the language used by the majority of news platforms contributed to minimizing or justifying Israel's reactions or Israel's actions? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was accidentally muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I think I'll start with the first question about bias. Partly it's the framing that comes down from editors onto the newsroom. Editors take their orders from their editors, and in the case of state media like the BBC, they take their orders from the government. I used to work for BBC Radio Newsroom, writing bulletins and summaries for radios 2, 3, 4, and 5 during the Second Intifada. And our editors used to have weekly meetings with the Home Office, and that's where they took steers on what language could be used. If we had to talk about Israeli targeted killings instead of assassinations, or if we couldn't mention occupation. Later, when I was at the World Service, the editors took their orders from the World Service, sorry, from the Foreign Office, but the effect was the same. We were effectively shepherded into an Overton window of acceptable opinion and acceptable language. Now, I think at the beginning of October the 7th, Israel was quite successful in framing October the 7th as something unprecedented and unprovoked, something savage and subhuman and incomprehensible in any way other than Hamas equals ISIS. And they kept hammering this message home. It's fundamentally a colonial idea, and particularly in countries with a colonial history like the UK and the US, that was very effective. It sort of rammed home this message: they're not people like us. And that very quickly became that they're not people, and their deaths weren't reported as being of the same value as Israeli deaths. Now, it's not something new. When I was working at the BBC in 2001, I remember at the beginning of the Second Intifada, when the first suicide bombings start, I had to write a script for one of the correspondents, Caroline Hawley, for Radio 5. And, the first question is always, Caroline, so what's the latest? What's the body count? Second question is always, what response can we expect from the Israelis? And the third question, which I wrote into the script, that's the one place where you have some creativity and some ability to broaden the debate. And I just wrote, well, Caroline, what could possibly drive a person to blow themselves up and kill themselves like this for such limited political gain? And my editor actually took the paper out of the printer when it came out, drew a red line through it, and came back and put it down on my desk and said, that's not news. Now, as far as the BBC is concerned, it's not. I mean, it's the context, it's the explanation, it's understanding, which in Reithian terms should be the news, but in terms of the way the BBC works, isn't. Now, in terms of what should be the news for the BBC, it's he said, she said. Now, I'll give you another example of a story I was reporting when it happened, which was the Israel's assassination of the PFLP's leader, Abu Ali Mustafa, also in 2001. After that happened, the PFLP put out a statement saying that they were going to carry out a revenge attack, which would be killing an Israeli official of the same level. And we initially reported that. I wrote the bulletin which reported that, and this was for Radio 4. The Israeli embassy called up to complain about it, and my editor wrung his hands and was actually quite angsty about it, but eventually cut that line. The Israelis had apparently told him that the PFLP statement could contain a coded warning that their operatives would use, and the BBC would be responsible for giving a signal to the PFLP to assassinate someone. We didn't run the PFLP statement. 2 weeks later, they assassinated Rehavim Ze'evi, a far-right Israeli, I think he was the tourism minister in East Jerusalem. And we hadn't given any forewarning of why they would have done that. We didn't explain why it happened in the bulletins that day either, and we certainly didn't carry the PFLP's statement. So again, even there in terms of he said, she said, they weren't, the BBC wasn't doing their job. I mean, the fact is that there's not an equivalence afforded by news groups like the BBC between occupiers and occupied. I mean, for people who have a basic grounding in international law. There shouldn't be anyway. But for the BBC, the occupiers are Democrats, and the occupied are terrorists. And so there's a subtext that they deserve whatever they've got coming. Whenever, I mean, that's a subtext. It's not said openly, but whenever Palestinian lobbyists got through the switchboard to editors on the shows I was working on, they were usually hung up on, or they were treated with disdain. And I could talk about this for a long time, but perhaps we don't have the time for it. In terms of how is language, was your second question, how is language being used to minimize justify Israel's actions?
Yes. How is the language used by major news platforms contributed to minimizing or justifying Israel's actions?
Okay, well, we've all seen, the absence of attribution or a reluctance to attribute when Israel kills Palestinians. On the other hand, we've seen a casting of doubt on the destruction and deaths those attacks cause. Aspersions cast on figures coming out from the Hamas-run health ministry. Memory holding of international law. I mean, there's been so many examples, but I remember there was some research close to the beginning of, I think it was just January, February 2024 by the Glasgow University Media Group. They found that in a 4-week period, BBC journalists used the terms murder, murderous, mass murder, brutal murder, merciless murder. I think it was 52 times to describe Israeli deaths, but they didn't use it once for Palestinian deaths, even when at that point, I think there were 10 or 20 times more Palestinian deaths. And similar bias existed in the use of the words massacre, slaughter, and atrocity. It again is there's no equivalence for Israeli and Palestinian lives. Another study found that Palestinians received 1 mention for every 2 Palestinian deaths, while Israelis got 8 mentions for every single Israeli death. There's difference between the broadsheets and like the Guardian or the Independent or something and the tabloids. I mean, there's typically or there was certainly under Biden a tendency by the broadsheets to report overbriefed US démarches on attempts by Blinken to de-escalate or calm tensions, and simultaneously a sort of inability to focus on effective war subsidies that Washington was providing, or military intervention that the UK was providing through its flights from Cyprus. And all of this helped to enable the conflict. It was consequential. Headlines like, Israel expresses regret for unintended harm or to civilians, or, Israel says it's scaling down the Gaza war. I mean, it all takes at face value what Israel's press office is saying. And Israel's press office, at the beginning of the war, had 200 people working effectively on propaganda, on disinformation, and those people weren't reported on, but they set the news agenda because a lot of journalists were very frightened of their careers being stuffed, and a lot of journalists' careers have been stuffed by actually standing up for proper news reporting, for principled reporting in this respect. I mean, information is a front in this war. That's why you have routine military censorship in Israel by the IDF on the weapons their forces use. On you're not allowed to use Security Cabinet leaks unless they're official. Can't report about hostages. It's also that's also why we have the mass killing of Gazan journalists. And that's something else we don't talk about, and communication strategies that support attacks on hospitals and other civilian areas. And, I think increasingly as journalists, we should be talking about whether or not we should be boycotting the Israeli government press office when they kill Gazan journalists. And I'm actually rather unhappy that my union's not doing that. But that's something which is more sort of shop talk, I suppose. I hope that sort of adds something to the questions.
Yes, thank you so much. That was, and thank you for also addressing thank you for also addressing the BBC's removing the documentary of the child because his father was a government official of Hamas. Thank you for going into detail with that. It has been quite informative. I would like to, we've just had this come in. So we were going to have Chris Sidoti, the member of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Palestine, but unfortunately, Chris was not able to attend this webinar in person, but he did send us a recorded message that we'll listen to now. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. The webinar is taking place at 4 a.m. Sydney time where I live, and so I'm unable to participate live. However, I'm grateful for the opportunity of sending you this video. The war in the area now called Israel and Palestine has been going on for 100 years. It's the Middle East's 100-year war. In spite of that, the events of the last 18 months are unique in that 100-year history. There has never been a time when there has been such mass slaughter, total destruction, life-taking siege, including starvation as a weapon of war. There has never been a time when the prospects of peace for all the peoples living in the area have seemed so dismal. My mother taught me when I was a child that two wrongs don't make a right. As I grew older and went and studied law and learned about international law, I saw that this basic moral principle was also a fundamental legal obligation. The Israeli occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, is an unlawful occupation. The International Court of Justice has said that. But that unlawful occupation did not justify the war crimes committed by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in southern Israel on the 7th and 8th of October. And those war crimes do not justify the war crimes committed by the State of Israel in Gaza and the West Bank since the 7th and 8th of October. My dead mother was right when she said that two wrongs don't make a right. And we are seeing very much the suffering that is caused by this cavalier approach to international legal obligations over the last 18 months. During that time, our Commission of Inquiry has produced 5 reports already on the events since 7th October 2023. We will be producing another 2 or 3 reports before the end of this year. There is much to tell about the events that have occurred. We have found, for example, that the activities of Palestinian fighters in southern Israel on 7-8 October 2023 constituted war crimes. We have also found that the continuing activities, the slaughter, destruction and siege imposed by the Israeli forces since then constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. These are serious crimes under international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and international criminal law. Our Commission has identified many of the acts that have occurred in Gaza since 7 October 2023 as constituting genocidal acts. We have not, however, yet completed our analysis of the question of genocidal purpose, a fundamental question in deciding whether or not genocide has occurred. We continue to work on this. What is quite clear, however, in my view, beyond reasonable doubt, is that there have been the most severe war crimes and crimes against humanity, and these constitute among the most severe crimes under international law. The return to hostilities over the last few days is certainly tragic. Tragic for the people of Gaza, tragic for all those who live in Palestine and Israel, who are sentenced to this continuing cycle of atrocity and violence. But it also represents an escalation of the violations of international law. It's very difficult to know what can be done about it. The United Nations Security Council is charged with responsibility for international peace and security. But the Security Council is totally dysfunctional and especially ineffective when it comes to dealing with the situation in Palestine and Israel. We can't hope for any effective action from the Security Council. It therefore comes back to individual states like the United Kingdom and individual groups of states like the European Union or even the Commonwealth to take a stand and to take action. I remember the important role the Commonwealth played in ending apartheid in South Africa and ending racial discrimination in what is now Zimbabwe. Maybe it has a role in Israel and Palestine, arising from the traditional British mandate for Mandate Palestine before 1947. Collectives of individuals also have an important role to play. In the absence of United Nations action and state action, there are things that we can do. To begin with, we can hold our own governments to account for their inaction and urge more positive steps upon them. We can also, as citizens, as consumers, as travellers, take decisions about how we will act in relation to this conflict. When the International Court of Justice handed down its advisory opinion on the occupation in July last year, it referred to the need for all states, the obligation of all states, to take action not to support or insist in any way the continuation of the unlawful occupation and the settlements. It called for the end of the occupation, the evacuation of the settlements, and international action to support a return to legality. This is something that we all have an opportunity and an obligation to take up. Perhaps rather than focusing on the ineffective, utterly useless United Nations Security Council, it's time to ask our governments and ourselves what we need to do to address this situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for being here. So we had one other speaker, Astrid Wagner. She's a cybersecurity specialist. She is not able to be here. So we will go ahead and move on. I would like to ask, do any of the speakers have anything that they would like to further address? Either Stephen Zunis, Lex, or Arthur? Okay. And Arthur, I actually had a quick question, if that's all right. So I was wondering, do you see the media bias changing that you're talking about? And what do you think that the impact of social media has had on this?
Well, in the bubble I'm in, there's a relatively small left-wing, group of left-wing journalists like Owen Jones or I don't know, Muin Rabbani. He's not a journalist who exchange information. You follow that. social media does allow important developments it turbocharges the speed at which they travel. It doesn't necessarily propel them into the newsrooms. I mean, the problem, as I say, is structural. The problem is to do with editors. I remember at the beginning of the Israeli invasion, there was a Sky News reporter who used the most ridiculous language. He talked about a stray bullet from an Israeli soldier entering a van and killing a young lady, to describe an Israeli soldier shooting a 3-year-old child dead. I mean, there hasn't, there has been a sort of retreat from that, but the sort of general double standards, I think, have intensified, if anything. And one of the problems that we have now is the usual sort of conflict fatigue you get from media, because they have the people have such short memories, especially in newsrooms, and they expect everyone else to. And because they don't have access to Gaza, and they're not pushing for access to Gaza, as far as I can see. That means their only loci for reporting is what they're getting on news feeds on the ground from the region, or Washington, Brussels, and there's very little in Brussels. The news coming out is irrelevant now. Mostly in Washington, they don't have access to Trump's inner circle or to the sort of Miriam Adelsons of this world, who have far more power in what's really going on than they should. So in a sense, they tend to pull back and just do everything generically and try not to tread on the Israeli government press office's toes. But that, in a sense, just descales the whole thing. It's been, I mean, in my social media milieu, people say, well, if 200 Israeli children had been killed in the last 3 days, it would be leading every news headline. Of course it would be. But there's a structural problem of racism here. How do we decolonize our minds? How do we decolonize our newsrooms? And I think there needs to be a lot more thinking about that, really.
Thank you so much. Stephen and Lex, do you have about 1 minute to give any concluding remarks? Stephen, let's start with you, please. Lex, we can go ahead and move on to you.
Let me turn on my microphone. Well, it's very clear we're in a bleak phase and state, especially also since the return of Trump to the White House and all the knock-on effects that this is having for the Ukraine war, for global trade, but also for Israel-Palestine. And it means that the likelihood of Israel being emboldened, and that's what we're seeing at the moment, or the likelihood, the expectation that things get worse in terms of how Israel will continue to resort to extreme violence is only going to be higher. So yeah, where can we see hope and the member of the independent committee, what's his name, Ciotti, quite rightly pointed to the responsibility. I mean, there is the responsibility of states, and it's very clear that in spite of the vast majority of Western leaders still standing by Israel, there are increasingly, especially also younger members of parliament, parliamentarians around Europe and other parts of the world, members of government, who are increasingly getting uncomfortable and realizing that, you know, they have to sort of choose between sort of the instinctive sort of imperative to stand by Israel and you know, not being sort of criticized for anti-Semitism, or on the other hand, you know, to not be complicit in the continuation of this illegal situation, on the commission of war crimes, on the genocide in Gaza, and so forth. So, as Francesca Albanese says, you know, there are cracks in the wall, and some light is coming in, and that's where civil society, in all its manifestations, individuals alone, civil society groups, the demonstrations that will undoubtedly resume, the possibility of legal actions at national courts, to either challenge weapons deliveries or challenge companies that are complicit in the commission of war crimes, trade unions, universities, further encampments, etc. You know, that's our only sort of resort at the present moment, and it's one that will not bring change overnight, but that will change the political dynamic, has the potential of changing the political dynamic significantly over the period to come. So this is what really the focus will continue, will need to be on, and that will also sort of collectively give us sort of hope to continue to weather this very dark storm that we are witnessing, and also hope to the people in Gaza, to the people in the West Bank, and all those others who stand with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stephen, can we hear some closing comments?
Sure. I just build on some of my comments at the end. I mentioned on the one hand, we're just here in the United States, we're just kind of struggling in horror as the Trump administration is taking a sledgehammer to some of the most basic functions of government, and the increasing authoritarianism. And but I think in certain ways this also creates an opening. I mean, the fact that they are targeting um, U.S. permanent residents for deportation simply for engaging in peaceful protest against U.S. support for Israel, and corporations, U.S. corporations that are supporting war and settlement and occupation. I think it's going to bring in a lot of liberals who might have been, you know, very hesitant to defend pro-Palestinian protests, who've been, you know, maybe reluctant to address the issue at all, because the stakes on civil liberties, you know, are pretty high. And you know, first they came for, you know, it's sort of the you know, a realization that that the forces of reaction are using Israel-Palestine as a wedge, you know, and false charges of anti-Semitism as a wedge to crack down on civil liberties, on political dissent overall. Already, hundreds of millions of dollars of federal money to major research universities has been canceled because they failed to press even more, and especially Columbia University. I mean, they cracked down so hard on pro-Palestinian activists. I mean, it was obscene. Yet they lost their money anyway. And I think that this is going to lead, I think, a lot more, you know, people to you know, recognize really what is at stake here, not just on civil liberties, but also, of course, looking at the underlying racism. I mean, it's very hard to accuse Democrats of racism because, oh, we're the progressive party, you know, we support affirmative action, we support efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, we support human rights and that kind of thing, you know. But you know, when we have such an overtly racist administration as we do now, it is very clear why we are supporting Israel and what it's all about. And similarly, I mean, when Trump is defending Russia and its illegal expansion and things like that, I mean, again, it's much easier in a lot of ways to say, well, support of Israel is based on the same kind of disdain for international legal norms, the same kind of support for an authoritarian-minded, far right-wing leader. And then this so big conference on anti-Semitism is coming up in Israel, where they're bringing in all these far right parties from Europe. I mean, come on, despite their history of anti-Semitism coming out. I mean, in other words, the battle lines are becoming a lot clearer now, and that really kind of messy thing where you had a lot of liberals, especially of my generation, who had this kind of sentimental attachment to Israel, who were who were very sensitive about anti-Semitism, and it's always important to be sensitive about anti-Semitism, as it would for any kind of bigotry. But but in a way that unfortunately made it difficult for people to recognize the legitimacy of critiques of Israel or Zionism and the like. In other words, I think it's becoming a much more clear left-right issue than Israel-Palestine has ever become before. And and the majority of Americans, are broadly speaking, on the center or left, and especially younger people, once again. And so, I think we do have something of a political opening, both because of just the horrors, the absolute horrors that the Israeli government is inflicting upon Palestinian civilians. But also, I think the political dynamic is such, that in terms of the domestic politics in the United States, that it does create an opening for the most serious challenges towards U.S. policies on Israel-Palestine than we've ever seen before.
Thank you so much for those closing statements. I did notice that Astrid just came in. Astrid, are you able to give a statement? Astrid, are you able to connect? Okay, I have not been able to receive word. So I will go ahead and close this session and say thank you to all of our distinguished speakers for your insights. And then once again, it has been an honor and deeply informative.
Okay.
Thank you to all our attendees, and Ramadan Kareem to all.
Astrid will speak now.
Yes, I'm
Astrid
now on. I'm here. I'm listening you. I'm sorry that I'm late. Because it was of the time. Yeah, I thought it was 5 p.m. in Vienna time, and so I had a problem. Do you hear me now?
It's wonderful to hear from you. Please go ahead.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I was not on the Zoom meeting till now. Okay. That's my problem. So I'm just entered now. I am in Vienna. I'm a lawyer in Vienna. And here in Vienna, we have, like in Germany, special problems, for the free speech. Yeah. So it's very difficult to speak about this problem. Yeah, there are laws in Vienna that are punishing people when, for example, they say from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. So I have a lot of problems as a lawyer and also with my clients because the right of free speech is not as it was before.
Yes,
say
Astrid,
like this.
I'm sorry. Is it possible for you to turn on your camera?
Oh, just a moment, because I'm. Aufzeichnung abbrechen. Oh, I'm on the phone now. It's now. Yeah, now you can. I see you.
Hello, lovely to
you
see
see
you.
me. Hello, yeah.
Hello.
Yes. As I told you, the problem is the free speech here in this special Austrian problem, and also in the German in Germany it's the same problem. Yeah, we have a lot of problem. Tomorrow there will be a demonstration in Vienna against the Israel war on Gaza, and I will explain the people the right, the Austrian people, the right, what they are allowed to say, that they are allowed to criticize Israel. And when you're criticizing Zionism, of course, this is not anti-Semitism. Yeah, and in Vienna there will be in June there will be an Zionistic Jewish Congress, yes, organized from Jews from Vienna, and these Jews do not agree with Israel. They are anti-Zionist, and they will make in Vienna there will be a congress. And this is very interesting because in Vienna there was also the first Zionist Congress that led then later that Israel was founded, and the Nakba and so on. And now there will be, in June of this year, 25, the first anti-Zionist Jewish Congress. And my friend, Dalia Sarik, she's a Jew from Vienna. She's organizing this. And they have they have many problems with their own family, and also the Israeli, it is called Kultusgemeinde, the Zionist Kultusgemeinde from Vienna, and there are a lot of problems, but we keep on fighting. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Sorry, I have not listened to now. There were a little bit. It was very interesting for me, but I was too late, and I'm very sorry for that. But I have the solidarity with you. Yeah, that's important for me. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, and I'm glad you were able to log in to the webinar. We're going to do one quick closing statement. Arthur, did you want to make a closing statement before we? Okay. Then I will go ahead and say thank you to everyone, our distinguished speakers, and thank you to all of our attendees, and a Ramadan Kareem to all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.